Welcome to this program titled Driving Excellence in Amyloidosis Care, the Role of Global Centers, with the aim of really expanding the global center network of amyloidosis center. Here is the faculty. So I am a co-program director and my name is Marianna Fontana. I am a professor of cardiology at the National Amyloidosis Center, Royal Free Hospital, University College London. Co-director of the program is Dr. Vaishali Sanchorawala. Dr. Vaishali works at the Amyloidosis Center of Boston University Copenhagen and Obici School of Medicine and Boston Medical Center. We also have Dr. Laura Obici, neurologist at the Amyloidosis Research and Treatment Center at Fondazione Policlinico San Matteo Pavia. And finally, we have in this program Professor David Adams, University Paris Saint-Clair National Reference Center for Amyloidosis Polyneuropathy. This is the agenda. I'll start with a brief introduction of the program, and then Dr. Sanchorawala will talk about unmet needs in amyloidosis diagnosis and care. So why are more specialist centers required? Then Dr. Laura Obici and Professor David Adams will talk about exploring the advantages and challenges of establishing additional amyloidosis center. And then we will talk about how we can work together to expand the global center network. And then Dr. Vaishali will do a close with the main key points to take home. This is the disclosure of the educational funding for this program. So AstraZeneca and Alexion, AstraZeneca Rare Disease, have provided an unrestricted educational grant towards this independent program. And the learning objectives today are first to describe the challenges faced by patients with amyloidosis in receiving timely diagnosis and treatment. Second, recognize the necessity of global amyloidosis centers in improving diagnosis and quality of care for patients with amyloidosis. And finally, discussing the barriers to setting up more global amyloidosis centers and propose solutions to overcome them. You can submit your question to share with our expert faculty at any point during the webinar using the Q&A tab. The questions will be moderated and addressed during the audience Q&A depending on the time available. And only the moderator and the faculty will see your questions. 3 questions will now appear on screen to understand your baseline confidence and knowledge and help us measure the learning outcomes. We will revisit these same 3 questions at the end of the session and see if your responses have changed. We will also provide the correct answer at this stage. So I'll now start with a brief introduction on really the disease, the prognosis, and how it's really important for early diagnosis for our patients. This is my disclosure. So when we think about cardiac amyloidosis, we really think about 2 main types of cardiac amyloidosis. Systemic AL amyloidosis was thought to be the most common type until very recently. So in AL amyloidosis, what happens is that we have a plasma cell dyscrasia at the level of the bone marrow, which produces free light chains that then misfolds and deposits as amyloid into all the different organs and tissues. In systemic AL amyloidosis, every single organ can be involved, so the presentations can be extremely variable, and this depends really on the pattern of organ involvement. So some patients will present with predominant neuropathy, others with predominant nephrotic syndromes, or other with predominant cardiac amyloidosis. As mentioned, AL was really thought to be the most common type until very recently. And when we think about patients with systemic AL amyloidosis, cardiac involvement is present in 50 to 70% of the patients. Prognosis is really is very severe if left untreated, is less than 6 months. So systemic AL amyloidosis with cardiac involvement really present a medical emergency. Median age of diagnosis is 50 to 60 years, and myeloma may coexist, but only in 15% of the patients. So the vast majority of patients have what we call a plasma cell dyscrasia. AL cardiac amyloidosis is a reported incidence of 1 per 100,000 per year, with, we said, cardiac involvement being present in 50 to 70%, depending on the way we assess it. But recent claims data report that AL cardiac amyloidosis is really increasing from 1.5 to 4.1 cases per 100,000. The other main type of amyloidosis is ATTR amyloidosis, so transthyretin amyloidosis. This was considered a rare form, but actually is now emerging as a relatively common form of heart failure, especially in the elderly. In ATTR amyloidosis, we have a protein, transthyretin, normally produced by the liver, which means folds and deposits into different organ and tissues as amyloid. We have two main types of ATTR amyloidosis. Wild-type ATTR amyloidosis, where the TTR gene is in its wild-type form, and patients present with a predominant cardiomyopathic phenotype, with shortness of breath being the most common symptoms of presentation. The majority of patients are really not diagnosed in life, and so it's absolutely important to raise the awareness and use the right technique to diagnose the disease. The other type of ATTR amyloidosis is hereditary ATTR amyloidosis. And here the main feature is that there is a mutation in the TTR gene. Patients can present with a cardiomyopathic phenotype, very similarly to wild-type ATTR amyloidosis, with a neuropathic phenotype. But now we know that actually most patients present with a mixed phenotype within the hereditary form, where both neuropathy and cardiomyopathy, they do coexist at the same time. ATTR wild-type amyloidosis, as discussed, is emerging as an underdiagnosed, underestimated cause of heart failure, especially in the elderly. To give you an example, wild-type ATTR amyloidosis has been reported to be present in 13% of the hospitalized older adult patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction with an increased wall thickness. And TTR amyloid deposits are found in more than 30% of patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction over the years of 75. Among patients undergoing scintigraphy, cardiac uptake was found in 1 to 3% of adults over the age of 75, and it's absolutely key to diagnose the disease and start treatment as soon as possible, because if left untreated, survival is between 2.5 and 4 years. Also, the prevalence of ATTR amyloidosis has been increased significantly. So historically, the prevalence has been described according to the predominant phenotype as polyneuropathic or cardiomyopathic, but as we said, it's really the mixed phenotype that is the most common. And now we estimated 50,000 patients worldwide. But the global incidence of hereditary ATTR amyloidosis could really be higher than initially expecting due to the non-specific symptoms which may lead to misdiagnosis and under-identification. And you will hear more about these in the later presentation. And whilst the neuropathy significantly affects the quality of life of our patients, it really presents the cardiac involvement which impacts on survival. Again, when cardiac involvement is present, the survival is between 2.5 and 4 years if left untreated. So, but then what are specialist amyloidosis centers? With growing awareness, the prevalence of patients with amyloidosis is increasing. However, early diagnosis and treatment remain challenging. Specialist centers are vital to provide quality care for complex diseases, and they provide specialized, comprehensive, coordinated, and multidisciplinary care based on current research and state-of-the-art diagnostic technologies and treatment. So establishing a specialist center can play an absolutely crucial role in improving patient outcomes for patients with amyloidosis, and this is what we will be talking today more in this webinar. Thank you very much for the attention. And now I'm very happy to introduce my co-director, Dr. Vaishali Sanchorawala, Professor of Medicine and Director of Amyloidosis Center, and she will be speaking about unmet needs in amyloidosis diagnosis and care, Why are more specialist centers required?
Greetings. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me here to discuss unmet needs in amyloidosis diagnosis and care. Why are more specialist centers required? I am Vaishali Sanchorawala from Boston University Amyloidosis Center in Boston, Massachusetts. These are my disclosures. Outline of my talk in unmet needs in amyloidosis will focus on patient journey, health disparities, and access to care. Amyloidosis remains a rare disease. Specifically, AL amyloidosis has an incidence of 1.2 cases per 100,000 person years, and hence the path to diagnosis can be quite complex and rocky for our patients. Amyloidosis Research Consortium, a patient-led organization, performed a social media survey of approximately 500 patients with amyloidosis and noted that time from initial symptoms to diagnosis of amyloidosis can be greater than 12 months in 40% of the patients. Moreover, number of physician visits before establishment of diagnosis can be greater than 2 for over 60% of the patients. And shockingly, these patients were diagnosed by primary care physicians only in 4% of the cases. Primary care physicians are supposed to be the gatekeepers of healthcare systems. So this survey indicates significant delays and multiple physician visits before a diagnosis of amyloidosis is obtained. What is different in 2022? Amyloidosis Research Consortium again performed a community survey of more than 1,200 patients and caregivers across the globe who participated in this survey. And the results were still quite shocking. Average physicians seen before accurate diagnosis of amyloidosis was obtained were 2 to 3. And top 3 barriers to diagnose amyloidosis were misdiagnosis, trouble getting tested, and reported trouble finding a specialist. The French study, including 603 patients, also suggested that the average time from symptom onset to diagnosis is 27 months. For patients with AL amyloidosis, it's 21 months. And for patients with hereditary ATTR amyloidosis with peripheral neuropathy, it is close to 4 years, 45.6 months. So the path to diagnosis of amyloidosis across the globe remains quite complex and long. Now, moving on to health disparities. This is a large Boston University amyloidosis center study of 2,400 patients with AL amyloidosis over 30 years, showing the racial and ethnic composition. In this cohort, minorities comprised of only 14% of the entire cohort, and majority of the patients were non-Hispanic whites. Moreover, non-Hispanic Blacks and Hispanics were younger and with more advanced stage of disease. Moreover, disparities in stem cell utilization, a standard of care treatment for AL amyloidosis, were driven by both socio-demographic and physiologic factors rather than race and ethnicity itself. Race and ethnicity did not have an independent effect on survival after controlling for disease severity and treatment use. Similar data from our center at Boston University, which is an unpublished data of ATTR amyloidosis of 1,000 patients over 50 years, showing the racial ethnic composition of this cohort, showing that the minorities comprised of 20% of the cohort, and majority of these patients were again non-Hispanic whites. 57% of patients received more than one treatment for ATTR amyloidosis. However, only 44% of non-Hispanic Blacks received treatment for ATTR amyloidosis. TTR stabilizers and TTR silencers were received by 33% of non-Hispanic Blacks compared to 44% of non-Hispanic whites. Access to care is the next topic on this outline of my presentation. This is a study from Boston University Amyloidosis Center with regard to patient outcomes in AL amyloidosis. The clock is ticking from symptoms to diagnosis. The median time from symptoms to diagnosis in this cohort was 7 months, ranging from 1 month to 61 months. The median follow-up on this study was 61 months. And as shown in figure 1b, median time from symptoms to diagnosis was less than 6 months for those who survived at the time of median follow-up of 61 months. However, in contrast, median time from symptoms to diagnosis was greater than 6 months in 2/3 of the patients who did not survive at median follow-up of 61 months. In Kaplan-Meier survival curves, patients who were diagnosed within 6 months of symptom onset had better survival than those who were diagnosed for more than 6 months from symptom onset. This cohort study found that amyloidosis-related mortality reported from the US death certificates significantly increased from 1.7 to 3.9 per million from 1979 to 2015. The highest age-adjusted death rate for amyloidosis in the USA were in the Black men and Black women. However, the southern states of the United States reported the lowest mortality despite having highest proportions of Black residents in the southern states. What does this mean? Geographic and racial variations in reported amyloidosis death rates suggest the potential for regional and geographic underdiagnosis. Again, also, this refers to access to best care available for patients living in the southern states. Not all amyloidosis as it seems. The presence of a monoclonal protein does not guarantee a diagnosis of AL amyloidosis. Moreover, existence of one type of amyloidosis does not make one immune to other types of amyloidosis. It requires experience to connect the dots. In conclusions, there are several unmet needs in diagnosis and care of patients with amyloidosis, and these are listed on the slide. Prompt diagnosis is crucial to improve patient outcome. Bridging the educational gap to increase awareness of this rare disease remains an unmet need. There are limited specialist centers in many regions across the globe, and patients have to travel distances for assessments at specialized centers, posing challenges for older, lower income, and advanced disease patients. Lack of centers also restricts access to early diagnosis and appropriate treatments. Moreover, absence of multidisciplinary care models do exist in many centers, and scarcity of accessible clinical trials and stringent eligibility criteria for the clinical trials restrict access to state-of-the-art treatments. With that, I would like to acknowledge the many members of the basic science and clinical teams at Boston University Amyloidosis Center. So thank you for your attention. And now I will be handing over to Professor David Adams and Professor Laura Obici.
Good afternoon. So in this topic, we'll be talk about exploring the advantages and challenges of establishing additional amyloidosis centers, a cross-sectional view of 2 European centers, me, Professor David Adams from Paris Reference Center for Hereditary Transthyretin Amyloidosis, and Dr. Laura Obici from Pavia in Italy. Here are my disclosures and those of Laura Obici. Just the building of our reference center in France, in Paris, took many decades. It started 40 years ago in a clinical department of neurology for patients with unknown origin of peripheral neuropathy associated with a strong pathology department during diagnosis of amyloidosis on biopsy, and later on molecular biology department for confirming variant in TTR gene. Later, for this multisystemic disease, several clinical departments for cardiology, nephrology join us to stronger the care of patients. We develop a liver transplant unit for this disease, and we developed a genetic counseling department for the families, and more recently developed a strong clinical research unit to assess different therapies in clinical trials. So we took times with progressive building. To assess to diagnostic facilities, this is a major role of reference center. You need to have strong laboratory modalities to confirm amyloidosis by pathological lab and genetic origin by molecular biological lab. Also, to be useful, you need short delay to access to this technique and tests, and also for response, you don't need to take several months to have results of this investigation. You need a periodic multidisciplinary meeting for decision with neurologists, cardiologists all together, and pathologists to confirm diagnosis also. And to facilitate access for diagnosis for the patient around the country, you need a strong secretary office to be contacting by mail or email at any time, to have a rapid and quick consultation to see the specialist, and to organize a day hospital for many investigations to confirm diagnosis, for biopsy, for example, and so on, and with a progressing cell. But to access to treatment, this is a major role of the referral center. It could be approved drugs or drugs of early access program, or if there is no therapies for the disease, you need to participate to be able to enroll patients in clinical trial. Also, except disease-modifying therapy, you have to propose symptomatic therapies, genetic counseling, and follow-up of carriers, for example, for hereditary disease. To get accessible diagnosis for patients without needing for long-distance travel. For example, in France, we have more than 1,000 kilometers from north to south and from east to west. And so at the beginning, all the patients 40 years ago had to come to Paris to have confirmation of diagnosis and to receive eventually therapies. This is not the case today. We have developed progressively a network of centers in different regions with teams able to take care of patients, to make diagnosis, and also to provide therapy for the patient. This is a network with the head of the French Health Ministry for neuromuscular disease, FINMUS. To offer accessible care for patients without need for long-distance travel. Now, I mentioned we have regional centers in different parts of the country with team trained for amyloidosis and amyloid neuropathy, for example. In this regional center, the patient can go and have a correct diagnosis after a biopsy and genetic test. And in this referral center, you can initiate the treatment, especially its IV infusion or subcutaneous injection for the first therapies, and to define the protocol of follow-up You have also in the referral center and regional center multidisciplinary care with neurologists, cardiologists, ophthalmologists. Here we can discuss to pursue the disease-modifying therapy and to define the periodic assessment of the disease every 6 months or yearly. This is possible to pursue the therapies at home or in day hospital near home, and also to have a biological monitoring and different questionnaire to follow at distance the patient, for example, for quality of life or disability. Another mission is to enroll patients in clinical trial. For those, the center need to have a main principal investigator, a key opinion leader, as we have during this webinar. This is a important contact for pharmaceutical companies and CRO to show the strong database of all patients you have in your center of potential candidate to be enrolled in the clinical trial. And you need to have good clinical practice. Also, you need to have a clinical research unit with pharmacologists, physicians, study coordinators, data manager for register, and clinical research nurse to provide different therapies and new drugs. We have to ensure that patients are not passed from specialty to specialty. And that's why we have to coordinate multidisciplinary care. We have altogether periodic multidisciplinary meeting for decision, for example, with neurologists and cardiologists systematically, and to get consensus joint decision for diagnosis, and if difficult cases, for example, to decide if you prove amyloidosis, you have to perform endomyocardial biopsy, to decide the first-line therapy, to switch from one therapy to another one, to recommend clinical trial, and also to coordinate and periodic multidisciplinary monitoring yearly for neurologists, cardiologists, ophthalmologists. We have developed during the 5 past years a national diagnostic and care protocol to ensure the homogeneity of the care all over the France. The program is online on Health Authority HAS website, and all the recommendations for diagnosis, management, and care for this patient are written clearly. Funding is crucial if you want to build a center and to make functioning correctly. We are happy in France to have a rare disease plan since it's 20 years, and we receive budget yearly from the French Health Ministry. We have a fixed part and variable part. This budget is useful to pay practitioners, secretariat, lab technicians, study coordinators. We can have other sources of funding, social security, pharmaceutical companies for clinical trial and for research, both from patients' organization for amyloidosis and pharmaceutical companies. What are the challenges and the missions of the reference center? We have a healthcare system structure very strong in France and also in several countries in Europe. With the aid of the National Health Ministry, we had the 4th Rare Disease Plan last year. The mission are many: to get access to diagnosis and therapy for all the patients, to train professionals to understand the amyloidosis, to develop research for diagnosis and therapy, to participate to clinical trial, to have therapeutic education for the patient. We have to work all together with patient organization, knowing that activity of centers is evaluated every 4 years. How to overcome these barriers? As I mentioned, you need to have a strong core team motivated for long-term investment with many specialists, many departments, and a strong clinical trial unit. You have to listen to opportunity for health ministry plan, financial support. you have the triadic care research training, and you have to have partnership with national patient organization for those with amyloidosis. Okay. So thank you for your attention. And now I let Dr. Laura Obici talk about experience on Pavia Center in Italy.
I also wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to contribute to this webinar and provide some hints based on our experience in Pavia. So the Amyloidosis Research and Treatment Center, which is based at Policlinico San Matteo in Pavia, Italy, was initially established in 1995 by Professor Giampaolo Merlini, and it was based in the Department of Internal Medicine. Then in 2006, also thanks to the generosity of patients that allowed us to renew a different building, we moved to a new dedicated location and we became an independent center. So our center builds on two pillars. One is the outpatient clinic, and the other one is a diagnostic and research laboratory. We perform approximately 4,000 clinical evaluations per year with 350 newly diagnosed patients. And we are in parallel collecting patient samples in our biobank, which is quite important for performing translational research. We can offer complete diagnostic workup, including amyloid typing, DNA analysis, cardiological and neurological assessments as appropriate, but also nutritional evaluation, psychological support, and genetic counseling. And we have also developed a telehealth approach with virtual evaluations that were started during the pandemic, but are still going on and are extremely valuable for patients that live far away from our center. As you can see in the map, patients are coming from different regions in Italy. We believe that research is an extremely important part of our mission, and we really value the interaction between the clinicians and the basic researchers. The research at our center aims at understanding the mechanism of disease, developing tools for accurate and early diagnosis, also studying biochemical and imaging tools for staging and monitoring of the disease, and developing and testing more effective, target and safe therapeutic approaches, both in the preclinical and in clinical settings. And presently we are working on 19 clinical trials. This strong relationship with research, in our view, allows access to innovative therapeutic opportunities for patients, including investigational rescue options for those that do not respond to standardized treatment, and also allows an increasingly personalized treatment approach. So we strongly believe this combination of research and clinical activity may provide an added value to our patients. As a center working on systemic amyloidosis, we became over time experienced not only in AL in transthyretin amyloidosis, but also on more rare form of systemic amyloidosis that overall are not so rare. And in particular, we also follow up patients with very hereditary forms of amyloidosis, particularly apolipoprotein A1, that has turned out to be relatively prevalent in our region. This is the diagnostic pathway of patients when they come for their first evaluation at our center. As you can see, they undergo multiple and multidisciplinary evaluations that aim at defining the clinical manifestations of the disease. So patients undergo neurological, internist, cardiological evaluations, and we performed both pathological investigations to find amyloid and to type amyloid, and we have facilities for both immunoelectron microscopy typing and mass spectrometry typing, and we perform all the laboratory tests that are needed for accurate identification of the amyloid type, including genetic analysis and bone marrow analysis. All these evaluations are then discussed in a weekly multidisciplinary meeting. And then based on that, the patient is provided with a report indicating the treatment choice, the follow-up, and also we recommend genetic counseling where applicable. In our experience, this approach has several advantages. The first one is the very rapid diagnostic process with the diagnosis often performed within a few days. This turns out also to be important for accurate diagnosis because many patients come to the center because of potential concomitant forms of systemic amyloidosis, and we need to differentiate more frequently in between ATTR and AL amyloidosis, but sometimes also between other less common types of systemic amyloidosis. And in some cases, they also arrive to our center with inconclusive results from previous investigations. And certainly the other major advantage is that we can provide treatment in a very short time period. But in recent years, our aim has become broader, and it doesn't only focus on addressing the physical needs of our patients. We are increasingly facing the several unmet needs of families, caregivers, and patients. And we try as much as we can, and we are trying to implement a more holistic approach to the management of the patients, providing supportive treatments, but also psychological support, professional and social support, and spiritual support when needed. This is not easy to reach. It requires a lot of reorganization and coordination among the different specialties, but we strongly believe we have to provide these patients a broader support to their needs. And to do that, of course, we need a multidisciplinary team that has been built in our hospital, also thanks to its multidisciplinary nature as a large scientific hospital in the region. So besides our core center, we have several specialists collaborating with us. This collaboration have been built over time. Of course, it takes some time, but certainly this provides several advantages. The first one is that you can discuss with physicians very close to you and with experience in the disease, a specific problem. And also when we have some specific issue to address, we can discuss and reach a decision in a multidisciplinary way. A referral center is not only important for the patients that access it, but it may also play an important role towards our other hospitals or other smaller centers. So our role is also to support local hospitals when they need some indications or investigations to complete the diagnostic workup for their patients or to discuss difficulties in management of patients. So typically, we interact with other centers in a hub and spoke approach when tissue typing is requested for difficult cases, or when patients with advanced disease and multiple organ involvement or affected by rarer forms have difficulties in management. And of course, to provide new approaches for patients that fail to respond to treatment or need off-label options. So in this respect, our center promoted years ago an Italian amyloidosis study group that now includes more than 40 different clinical institutions throughout the country. Every year we meet to share common updated diagnostic and therapeutic protocols. The objective is to make qualified care readily accessible to patients and also to facilitate enrollment in clinical trials. We also participate into other networks. One is the regional network for rare diseases. This is an important part of our activity to collaborate with other regional hospitals. And the role we have received from the region is important. We have to coordinate recommendations for diagnosis and treatment of systemic amyloidosis. We are able to provide access to all disease-modifying therapies, access to off-label treatments, and also we can grant exemption to patients for all disease-related costs. But we also participate, as David mentioned, to the European reference networks for rare diseases that are very important, increasingly important networks to work together with other European centers on these difficult diseases. And then we also have collaborations with patients advocacy group. We participate in their scientific committees, and we also participate, organize with them periodic meetings for patients and families across different regions. Of course, funding is an extremely important part when you build a referral center. In Italy, we are lucky because we are in a public health system. So we have funding from the regional health system and from the Italian Ministry of Health. And as the hospital is recognized as a research institute of national relevance, we also have access to research funding. Research funding also comes from the university and the Italian Ministry of University and Research. And then we participate as others in competitive grants from several research national and international agencies. And of course, collaborating with other centers increasing the chances to obtain these funding. So several challenges and opportunities, of course, when you want to build a referral center for this disease. Of course, you need to involve and motivate all the specialists that you need, and this may take some time. Then you need some dedicated spaces, adequate human resources, including nurses and study coordinators that are extremely important for the success of all research and clinical activities. You need to implement ICO-specialized technologies for diagnosis and monitoring, requiring funding, continuous funding, and also you need to receive and maintain accreditation by local, national, and when possible, European health authorities. And of course, establishing national and international research collaboration is extremely important, although a challenging in the beginning is extremely rewarding over time. Several opportunities can be shared with all the people that get involved in this project. Of course, the satisfaction of providing higher quality care to the patients, intense relationship, long-term relationship with patients and families. You have the opportunity to work in team-based systems, which is extremely rewarding for personal knowledge. And of course, you can potentially provide high-quality publications and in some cases, as it is in Pavia, also academic career opportunities. Again, the chance to networking with national and international peers and together try to reach competitive funding opportunities. So in summary, I hope we have convinced you that there are several benefits in establishing specialist amyloidosis centers. The first one certainly is the possibility to concentrate the necessary knowledge and the resources to provide highly specialized care to these patients. This has the chance to give an easier access to high quality care to the patients, early diagnosis and treatment, access to investigational drugs, and from the specialist perspective, of course, team learning, increasing knowledge, and also possibility to perform research in parallel with clinical activities. There are several challenges, as we mentioned. The first one is to get adequate funding, accreditation by health authorities, and access to high-cost specialized technologies for diagnosis and monitor that are absolutely key for providing high-quality care. There are some suggestions that we can provide to overcome these barriers. Certainly, start looking for support from existing centers, for example, through exchange programs. Several investigators and clinicians come to our center every year and they stay for a few days or longer, and we start working together. And this is extremely important to return to the hospital and start to build the initial team. Of course, there is the need for motivated people, but I think this is really a disease that motivates people to work on. Listen to the opportunities for funding, and of course, working closely with patients' organizations. Thank you for your attention. I'm now happy to hand over to Marianna again for leading the question and answer session.